Frothy Friday, here we are again. I think I like to think about that little pause there because apparently you lose people after 3 seconds if it's not engaging enough. So we probably just lost most people. That's kind of funny. But you know who we didn't lose? My dad and my mum, because this is a really great way for me to tell them what's been going on in my head and my life for the past week since last Frothy Friday, because I haven't seen them in a while. Lockdowns and all that kind of business. I know lots of people are going through that stuff. So, yeah. Hi, Mum. Hi, Dad. This week, I just finished watching Australian Story. If you're Australian and you have never watched Australian Story, get on it. Because I remember watching it when I was young. Mum tapes, you don't tape anymore, records Australian stories and ones that she thinks I like. So when I go and visit her, that we sit and watch Australian stories. It's like legitimate, proper journalism, at least in my opinion. Telling real stories, like the stories that should be told, rather than necessarily the whiz bang celebrity stories that people are attracted to. Not to say they don't have those whiz bang celebrities on there, because the one I watched was a 2-part series, and I used it as my kind of pattern interrupt this week. While sometimes I like to just eat and focus on the eating. Most of the time I'm like, nah, it's fucking boring. And so I'll watch something, and the Premier League starts this weekend. So, so I watched the Australian Story with Luke Longley, and you probably watched The Last Dance, which is that series on Netflix, because even if you don't give a shit about basketball, it's just phenomenal to see how the Chicago Bulls back in the 90s were like a force across the world for, just how good a team could be. With Michael Jordan, obviously, they had the best player in the world. And Luke Longley was a part of that, first Australian basketballer ever to play in the NBA, and let alone play in the NBA. He won 3 championships during that time. And the documentary is great because he's just like this super chill frother, but it takes you on his journey as someone who was phenomenal at their sport. And he says he stumbled into championships, but he's a bit of a humble dude. But and there is admittedly quite a bit of luck involved in how it works over there in terms of drafts and all that kind of stuff, and the stars aligning. But man, what a champion! Like, Australians love champions, and yeah, this story is really great. There's a part of it where they talk about The Last Dance and how, he's in the footage. And I remember watching it and I was like, oh yeah, there's Luke. Because I was infatuated with the Chicago Bulls, even though I didn't really watch basketball. I had all the basketball cards and all that kind of stuff growing up, because you could sense the energy of whatever was going on around the world surrounding them. It was similar to, Manchester United, the team I followed. There was an energy around that team in the 90s. And yeah, very attractive, especially to young kids who are like dreaming of becoming professional sportsmen. And Luke Longley was always he always seemed kind of quiet. And yeah, he wasn't really, he wasn't interviewed in The Last Dance. And that was only a tiny part of the documentary, just to sort of acknowledge that, because props to Australian Story for telling his story. And maybe if he was in it, then they wouldn't have done the Australian Story version. So I'm kind of glad he wasn't in The Last Dance, because I got to watch this 2-part, half an hour a piece documentary of an Australian icon who's fucking just a legend. He just seemed like a legend of a dude. And you watch how he goes through being involved in such a high intensity, because, like, everyone thinks it'd be awesome to be a celebrity sportsman, but like he says, when you're in it, it's intense. It's like a lot of pressure. And then to come off that, it's like when people retire. He retired through injury, and then you come off that kind of being in that minutia, and then you have to drop back into everyday life. Well, not everyday life, because you don't even know what everyday life is, because you're you're in a world championship, even though world championship's a bit rich, from the Americans. Yeah, it's fascinating. I find that stuff really interesting to watch. What's the landing for sports professionals? I went to the world's biggest tech conference in Portugal quite a few years ago. And Luis Saha, he's an ex-Man United player, had an app that he was talking about, and I can't remember what it's called. I haven't really heard of it since, but it was all about pairing up. It's kind of like Tinder for ex-footballers and ex-sports stars for businesses, and giving them something to do when they finish, where they can apply that kind of determination that they had to some other field. It's got to be a really tough transition. You think about anyone who's got people looking up to them and all this attention, and all of a sudden they're just regular. I don't know, pretty cool. I highly recommend if you're just continually watching Netflix and stuff, switch over, because I'm pretty sure you can watch it. Well, you can, because I was watching it on YouTube. Yeah, check out some Australian stories, especially if you are Australian and you want to feel good in amongst all the horrific underlying Australian stories, because there's so many different perspectives and so many amazing stories from First Australians and refugees, and I think Arndo's is one. It's a really great one. I think it was one with Stan Grant I've seen. It was amazing. Indigenous reporter. It's just phenomenal. What a gift that we've got this. I might just go on a Australian story. No, we'll not binge watch because that's fucked. But start watching some more Australian stories. On the projector there. There's no projector there. Oh, I pointed the wrong way. Yeah. Fair bit of froth this week. I held some workshops. Well, workshops, you call them that? I held some space. That's a bit wanky as well. I was present for some humans getting together to riff on some radness. That's what I was. I think it's really important these days to be doing that kind of stuff. Not necessarily in the professional sense, but in the sense of just getting together and having a yarn and connecting and really thinking about what questions we're asking each other. Because that was kind of the context of the last group conversation I had last night. And when you're in a really good group conversation, even if it's at the end of the day and it's on technology, you can walk away frothing. Like, yeah, technology zaps you, but it also doesn't have to. Yeah. I don't know. I don't have the science on that, but that conversation I had yesterday afternoon was, I went from probably, 70-something%, or maybe I was higher, but yeah, I was just beaming after it. And you talk about a conversation, I can come up with some good questions in the moment, and sure you can, but that conversation yesterday was as the result of probably between me and my buddy Steve, and then the rest of the people in that group, and then the training that we've done individually and collectively. Whoa, how many yarns went into the curation of that conversation, which was probably 4 or 5 questions, and curation of the space as well. I'm finding a lot of the time, if I'm being hired to do a workshop, I don't really have any ritual protocols, and maybe that's my role, is to come in and say, oh, hey, you could try this, through the act of doing. For example, what's your percentage? How you feeling? Just put it in the chat. It gives you a real, cross-section of how people are straight off the bat. You don't have to know them. It's like, yeah, I'm 50%. It's like, fuck, okay. I'm facilitating this conversation. I need to send a cheeky message when I get a break. Maybe I'll put some music in there. Maybe I'll throw to someone, and I'll just send that person some love. I'll ask the group, can you send that person some love? And, that might sound a bit woohoo. Yeah, woohoo. It does sound woohoo. Fuck off, woo-woo. But it fully works, people just making a hand gesture to the Zoom screen, or just putting the love heart. I don't know if you can do that on Zoom. But anyway, whatever you can do, people feel that energy through the call. And you can do that and so many of us are doing Zoom calls. You can do that on every fucking call. Why not? It takes like literally a minute. And then when I have my break, I can just inquire with that person, hey, is there anything I can do to support you, or we can do to support you? And one of the ladies, she had to put her dog down, like that's something that, unless you ask that question, and it's not a fucking how are you, or how you going, because you're giving people an opportunity to lie, because they do, because there's structures and hierarchies. And so then I can, I can't do anything about that, but I can send some nice words to her, and if she needs some more support, then I have the power to invite other people within that group to, hey, maybe it'd be worth checking in on her today and just sending a bit of love. So yeah, that's a really simple thing that we can all be doing for each other. And it was fundamental to the last conversation I had last night, which is, what's the container that you're creating, excuse me, that allows people to be vulnerable. And Steve Brophy had this beautiful sort of 3 things to think about. And it was lean, clean, and seen. And so how can we help people lean in to the conversation? They might physically lean in, but lean in as well as, and in that leaning, they're listening and active listening. Clean is clean communication, which is part of Syntropic World and Christine McDougall's work. And that's about how do we, it's very much active listening as well, but it's also if something triggers us, or if something comes up that doesn't resonate, I have the agency to bring up why and to enter into dialogue about that. And it's not about, oh, shut the fuck up, you're wrong. It's more about like, so from my perspective, I'm seeing that this way, and but I'm really curious as to learn more about your perspective in that, and then having a dialogue around it. That was clean. And then seen. Again, is active listening. How are you seeing the person? I'm truly seeing you, and the ability for me to be seen as well, and to create the space that creates that respect. So from a Zoom perspective, things like turning your own screen off. I'm continually like looking at myself here, which is kind of narcissistic a little bit. Turn your own screen off, which is really easy to do. When do you go from Brady Bunch view to singular focus? Anyway, this isn't a Zoom tutorial. It's fucking boring. Nah, it's really helpful though. See, this is what goes on in my head. Oh, maybe he's mad. But yeah, we're coming up to 15 minutes. I don't like to go over 15. That's a lot of time for mum and dad, to be watching this. So that's pretty much... so much stuff happened this week, but that's enough from me, I think. I got back out in amongst the waves this week. I hadn't surfed in 2 or 3 weeks, and every time I go out there, that's my spot, and I'll come back with all these answers, and I'll just be frothing. And it's so bizarre that these things that you probably have too, that you do, and you know how beneficial they are for you, but you just something happens and you stop doing it. So yeah, if you've seen any of my beat breathing, love to see people doing more of that. I mean, getting really great feedback for that, except the platforms keep pulling it down, obviously because it's copyright and I don't have the right to put up those songs. So maybe I'm thinking maybe I'll just reach out to all my mates who are musicians and do their songs, and have more fun, play, and froth on. Much love.